So, good evening. This is CAGNY, Communities Against Gatwick Noise and Emissions. We are the umbrella aviation and environment group for Sussex, Surrey, and Kent. Every year we host online talks called Time is Ticking to coincide with COP. This year is COP 30. And the idea is that we tackle subjects to do with climate change in relation to the impact of aviation, um, Gatwick Airport, and other airports in the UK and potentially across the world. So, this is our last session for this year. We've had amazing audiences, so thank you everyone that has attended previous events. Most of them have been this week with Ruth Cadbury last night, Sean Berry the night before, and then the legal team giving an update on the new runway legal challenge that CAGNY has launched against the Secretary of State for Transport. So this evening, we're looking to a guest speaker, Simon Collins, to tell us about the science and the River Mole. The two go together, very much so. And I just wanted to touch on something here that water is arguably one of the most precious natural resources, yet pollution of our fresh water habitat runs rampant. We've all seen the headlines in the media, mostly to do with Fergal Sharkey. But there are lots of rivers around the UK that are suffering, and we need water. So, one of the reasons is sewage and urban pollution and industrial pollution all contribute to the problems. Many water quality problems arise from multiple sources of pollution spread across the landscape. And with the increase in rainfall due to climate change, it's resulting in overwhelming sewers. And unfortunately, that is ending up in our waterways. And so it is a major subject that we actually really argued on during the new runway hearings at Gatwick Airport, because the sewage and the water, heavy rainfall day will add 67%, over 67% of water and waste to the system. And Gatwick is reliant upon Thames Water, who has two wastewater treatment plants that service Gatwick and residential homes that are near capacity. And if you know about the Crawley area, you will know that it's facing a lot of housing on top of that. So it was a key factor for us. It was if you like, a byproduct of airport expansion, but it was a very important one because it's the ramification and impacts the local environment. And obviously the global environment is climate change. So the two very much sit together. This evening, we're delighted to welcome Simon Collins of the River Mole, as I said. He will know far more than myself on this subject. So I'm just going to do a bit of technical here. I should be getting quite good at this by now, shouldn't I? Let me bring Simon down by the side of me. Here we are. Say thank you ever so. And I'm going to hand over to you, if I may.
Thank you very much, Sally. That's a marvelous introduction and pretty much most of my talk. So I think you've just summarized it brilliantly. Thank you so much. No, it's a really serious issue, isn't it? So I'm going to try and share my display here, and you can all let me know if you can see it, which I think is traditional in these circumstances. Can everyone see that? River Mole River Watch in all its glory. So I think the first thing to say is thank you very much for inviting me to speak about our charity, River Mole River Watch. And as Sally was saying so eloquently, water is such an important issue across the whole catchment. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our volunteer-led evidence-based charity, which is working to improve the River Mole for people and wildlife. And obviously that overlaps quite a bit with your action to ensure that water remains a key issue in what you're battling for, which is, more sustainable aviation or less of it. So tonight I want to share what our citizen science data is telling us about the river, some of our successes, and also what we've learned from thousands of data points. So I've broken it up into a structure which looks like this. So number one is, why does the mole matter? Then we'll look at who we are and what we do. We've had some successes, so we'll tell you a little bit about what the successes are and what our data shows in a bit more detail. What are the main pressures on the mole catchment, which actually Sally just summarised very well. I'll add perhaps a little bit to that, but I expect nothing you don't know. Why do flooding and low flows matter so much here? And then what are reasons to be hopeful and some of River Mole River Watch's priorities? For most of this talk, I'll be talking about the upper mole, which is the bit towards the south, which I guess is where most of us live. I live in Reigate. I expect a lot of the audience are from some sort of around Gatwick, if I can put it like that. And we'll look at the whole catchment, though, is fascinating. We test all the way down to the lower mole through Cobham and Esher and Molesey, and it all has a story to tell, but we'll be focusing on the upper mole in this talk. So why does the mole matter? Well, I don't think I have to tell such a knowledgeable audience why it matters, but we can say that it's a very unusual and much loved river. It, of course, rises on the Weald clay and then flows kind of northerly and slightly northwesterly through the Chalk Mole Gap, where in dry years, sections of flow can actually vanish, of course, and that's happened in 1949 and 1976. Some of us will remember that. And again in 2022. And in fact, we were kind of looking this year at some metrics to suggest it might be drying up again through the gap, but of course it didn't because it was quite wet in July. But perhaps if we don't get too much rain this winter, we could risk another vanishing next summer. So that's maybe something to look at. So the whole setup makes it a unique catchment, hydrologically speaking, because it shares characteristics of rare chalk streams, but also rapidly responds to rainfall. So it's a kind of mixed, very mixed catchment. And the river is used for everything from fishing to paddling and swimming and walking. And it flows through nationally valued landscapes like the North Downs and the Surrey Hills. There's lots of SSSIs and ancient woodlands all over the catchment. And it sits in a catchment which is also rapidly urbanised. And there's a figure somewhere which since the 1960s, the urban extent has doubled or more than doubled, which I suppose isn't surprising. And so it's under significant pressure also from roads. The M23 and M25 kind of bound the edges of our catchment. And of course, agriculture and wastewater are big challenges. And this is even before we take into account future development and climate change. One of the big questions is, how polluted is the River Mole? Well, before we began testing, the story people told us about the River Mole depended on who you asked, really. There are many fascinating accounts and anecdotes and memories of the river throughout the years, but there's very little agreement, really, on what the river's like. So historic EA reports celebrated the greatest fish diversity of any river in the Mole. And that was quite recent, that report. It's kind of in the 2000s, I think. And anglers are still catching record fish. Yet we've, of course, had mass fish deaths, several in the past few years, and the fish have been described as surviving in a war zone, even outside those events. Farmers tell us their streams are cleaner than ever. They've told us that straight off the bat when we visited them, and we measure high levels, but we measure high levels of legacy nutrients in many tributaries. The EA monitor with electrofishing sounds a bit cruel, but they are released. And this shows good fish diversity in some streams in the catchment. But of course, others observing over the years have really seen a decline in fish numbers and invertebrates. People regularly swim and paddle happily at the stepping stones and elsewhere. But of course, we also hear of people falling ill and dogs falling ill and even livestock falling ill from getting in the water. Thames Water, of course, described their sewage treatment works as modernised and largely automated, but we know spill durations exceed 10,000 hours per year very often, and the quality of treated effluent is also rather suspect in some sewage treatment works, and all of them are sites of concern, which means they're non-compliant in one way or another. And finally, some residents say it floods less, but others say, well, flows are more extreme than they've ever seen. well, perhaps particularly low flows. So there's just no simple, consistent story, let alone much data. Nobody seemed to agree on what the river was doing. So to understand it, we really started Rivermore Riverwatch, and that was getting on for 3 years ago. So who are we and what do we do? As I said, we're a volunteer-powered charity. We're all volunteers, and we recruit and train and manage our fantastic team of citizen scientists. And that's just a wonderful job, actually. Out of all this, it's just brilliant, the people we've met. And they're all passionate and they all give up time to do this. And they adopt a stream. The kind of way we do it is that they've adopted a stream and they collect data on their stream and upload it. And that's built this amazing data set. And our testing includes phosphate and nitrate, ammonia, conductivity and temperature. We had to obviously choose what we could ask our people to do. You can't load them up with too much stuff, it takes too long. But we feel that's a good start. We may be adding different types of measurement to that over the years. But we take the data and we analyse it and we write a report of the conditions in the catchment each month. And our data is highly regarded. It's attracted a lot of academic users. We were on a call with UCL, a doctor from UCL who wants our data. We've worked with the Reading University, of course. Jess Newman, Professor Jess Newman is one of our trustees, and we've assisted research and student projects with them. And our data also feeds into national data hubs, which means anyone can look at it. There's a website called Castco. I can never remember what that means, but somebody will probably know. And you can look at our data there. And recently we've been trialing new technology, floating sensors that continuously monitor various metrics as the water flows through these sensors. Quite amazing. And in fact, we were talking to Thames Water today. I know we have different opinions about them. Well, we share your opinion too, I think. But they are looking at deploying these sensors which monitor water quality continuously. And so we were talking to them today and looking at ways we can share that data and contribute. So our data is building up into one of the most complete contemporary data sets of really any river group in the country. We're also trying to raise awareness, so we do talks and visits to schools and festivals. So that's that. An example of where we've been successful, and we've held a polluter to account, so to speak, is at Hawley Sewage Treatment Works. We were the first to uncover the true extent and seriousness of years of repeated sewage flooding, which was going out of the works onto public land across footpaths and properties around the sewage works and flooding into properties. So here's I'll show you a bit of this video which helped us to sort of raise this in the media. Is this going to work? If it doesn't, never mind.
Okay, Hawley Sewage Works. Storm tanks are overflowing down the service track.
Don't know if you can hear that.
Into the brook here. Pouring out into the ditch. All of this is from these storm tanks. Unsheeted or barely screened effluent. Very close to West Vale. Lots of water pouring out of the storm tanks behind there. And I mean a lot. Across this footpath, the footpath is just to the left, well underwater. Going past.
The reason why this bund is here, because when it rains, the river rises to a certain level, the river is out of sight.
The storm tank here overflow and untreated sewage effluent pours across a footpath here, that's underwater, flows down to recreational fields, flowing across the land into a ditch. All of this is untreated sewage effluent.
Further down. Right, that's enough of that. But that was kind of a light bulb moment for us, I think, when we realised all was not well. You know, this had been largely ignored or tolerated, I should say. And we went along and tested it. We found E. coli. We did that's a picture of me, by the way, here, collecting rather unscientifically and rather hazardously, as it turned out, water pouring out of this sewage works. And we measured E. coli, sent it off to a lab. And, you know, a safe limit of E. coli is like 900 CFU per 100 millilitres of sample. You know, this came back at 1,300,000 CFU per 100 millilitres. I mean, it was insanely hazardous stuff. Raw sewage. That's sewage fungus over here, look. And to cut a long story short, we escalated the evidence. You know, we engaged with the media. It was really rather exciting. There's just a selection of media coverage there. We were even on Have I Got News for You? And it was all very exciting. But the point was, we wanted to stop this. And it took years of action to eventually get Thames Water to spend £1 million on emergency works, which has stopped the raw sewage flooding. But the fixes are temporary because bigger upgrades are needed at Hawley. It's not the end of the story, this. This has just stopped the works from flooding everywhere else, you know, because they couldn't cope with the capacity. So, but I guess our success at Hawley demonstrates the power of citizen science and engaging with lots of stakeholders. I mean, the MP, Chris Coughlin, was really useful towards the end of this process. Chris liked to take a lot of the glory, which is fine. But he did do a great job helping us, as did several other MPs and councillors and South East Rivers Trust and all sorts. So it did work. We were I suppose that's a success anyway. Other successes, of course, have included trying to identify severe pollution hotspots around the Mole catchment. And we've got a general idea that our monthly surveys reveal, you know, where the least well-performing streams are. We've got a kind of league table. You can see a bit of it up here. And at the bottom of it, you've got these streams. So the first one we looked at was Lye Brook, because it consistently came at the bottom. And I did a whole talk on Lye Brook to the parish council there. And a sort of jaw-dropping talk for the residents of Lye Brook, because, of course, Homeward Sewage Works was discharging pretty much all the discharge into the Lye Brook. Storm overflows were very common, and just the quality of treated effluent seemed to be very poor. So we did a detailed subcatchment survey where we did a much more sort of forensic analysis and testing, and it uncovered further issues, which are still ongoing, to be honest. It's not just pollution. We're also working with, oh dear, I don't know what that red line is. Have I just drawn over it by mistake? Can you see that red line? Is it scribbled all over it? How do I get rid of that? Oh dear. Shall I stop? That's a bit unfortunate. Shall I stop sharing and start again? Way. I've never come across that before. Sorry, folks. Anyone got any ideas about how to get rid of this?
I think you've touched on draw.
I think I have.
Can you do undo?
How do I get rid of that?
Undo.
Oh, that looks good. Is that gone?
Yep, that's gone.
That's a relief. Right, sorry about that. I shall try and avoid touching the mouse. Okay, so we don't just look at pollution, we also look at flooding, and we're working with a group called Flood Mapper, and they've developed with us this bridge alert system, bridge flooding alert system. You know, we've got several bridges that flood in the catchment, particularly in the Upper Mole, Lee Street Bridge, Flantford Bridge, Brockham Bridge. There's a whole variety of them. And Flood Mapper is a web-based alert system which just basically says whether they're flooded or not. And we've also engaged, as I said, with water companies and councils, farmers and so on. And all of our engagement in lobbying is really based on our data. Right, try not to draw on the screen. What does our data show? Well, we've done more than 4,000 tests now. And after that many tests, we've got a pretty clear picture of what's emerging. And more than 80% of our results show that the river is in moderate, poor or bad water quality condition. So that's pretty similar actually to the condition of many UK rivers. But our data has shown, I'm going to try not to draw on the screen so I can't really point, but if you look at the top left-hand chart there, that's our sort of basic average phosphates and river discharge. So the river discharge is in blue, and you can see that it goes up in winter. Obviously the river goes up, but the concentration of phosphate comes down, and that's one of our key findings really. And it's fairly obvious, I suppose, that pollution is less concentrated when dilution occurs with more discharge, but it also shows that low flows are where the pollutants become very concentrated in summer, and that's the key stress point. So with flooding, of course, it means we also get more sewage overflows, even during times of high discharge. So the river never really gets a break. So our data shows the poorest water quality is consistently found downstream of sewage treatment works, but many streams without Thames water outfalls are also falling below water quality standards. It's worth pointing out there are some good streams in the catchment. These are really just downstream of, upstream of Crawley, from the Worth Forest, Burstow Brook, not Burstow Brook, Bewbush Brook, parts of Stamford Brook, one or two of the smaller streams coming off the chalk, such as Shag Brook, are often come up good. But even these still edge into moderate on occasions. We also measure nitrate, and SES Water are sponsoring us as part of their 2-year investigation, because if you look at the bottom left chart there, you can see that's nitrate as tested by SES Water from their boreholes, which is where we get our drinking water from. And you can see there's been some spikes in nitrate approaching that line at 50 milligrams per litre, which is kind of a cut-off level in terms of standards. And what they're trying to do is identify sources. So they're looking at our data. They've provided us with some kit, and we, alongside the rest of our monthly data, we test nitrate. And you can see an example of the June, July, August summer nitrate tests there. And it's unfortunate because a lot of the highest nitrate is found through the Mole Gap, which of course is where the water disappears into the aquifer through the chalk. So that's unfortunate. In any case, they're going to do a very detailed survey with their own data plus our data to try and identify and then eventually mitigate rising nitrate in the aquifer. Top right there, you've got a snapshot of a river mole E. coli test we did downstream during summer in places where people swim and paddle. Results show changes downstream are pretty consistent with illnesses. In other words, it's fairly sporadic. You can see there, you might just be able to see the level of E. coli kind of dropped through the Mole Gap. And we think that's because the chalk both provides spring water, which is cleaner, as well as taking it in, especially at Leatherhead with the Fetcham Springs there. You have a cleaner, cooler water coming in. So that's maybe why E. coli levels dropped through that area. And it was definitely worse upstream and worse downstream. And finally, bottom right there, one example of how our data has highlighted issues is at Hookwood Common Brook. Our monthly data showed those huge spikes in ammonia, particularly from kind of March this year, a fairly dry spring, if you remember. And this elevated ammonia and phosphate, we followed up with one another forensic subcatchment survey, and we identified a packaged treatment plant, that's a small sewage treatment plant, causing the pollution in the stream. And we're challenging the EA on the permit conditions, which seemingly are allowing this to happen. So it's permitted, this sewage treatment plant, but various conditions seem to be iffy. So again, we're lobbying the EA and we're seeking ways to do that in a kind of more robust manner, if you see what I mean. Right, what are the main pressures? I won't spend too long on this because I think you know it. Of course you do, because you've dealt with this all. Pollution comes from many sources, as Sally was saying, and really involves all our behaviours, if I can put it like that, if we live or work in the catchment. So sewage effluent is the largest contributor of pollution in the river. So you can see that all 9 of our big sewage treatment works are sites of concern. They're obviously not operating up to scratch. They frequently, Homewood, for example, has an issue with quality of effluent. Hawley, as we've seen, spills during high rainfall events. Crawley has a capacity issue as well, and was also responsible for the 2017 pollution event, which killed thousands of fish in the Gatwick Stream. That's by far the biggest fish kill we've had. They also didn't want to admit it, if you remember, and that's of interest a little later on. It took a while for courts to actually pin them down. I think they were quite awkward about it. Road runoff also is an issue in our catchment. I'm not going to do all of these, but road runoff is an issue, highlighted by the A24 diesel spill along a 10-mile stretch last summer. And we also have significant high-risk outfalls coming off these busy motorways. And we're currently involved with a group called Stormwater Shepherds, who are garnering groups like ours to monitor the planned upgrade of national highways outfalls, and it's particularly on the M25, which we need to make sure are done properly, if you like. Misconnections are another big problem. Domestic misconnections caused by appliances such as washing machines being plumbed into the surface water sewer can cause pollution, especially in smaller tributaries. And some of my colleagues on the trustees are involved with this problem on the Rye Brook in Ashted, a small tributary of the Mole, which has misconnection problems. And some industries, oddly enough, actually improve water quality. So, for example, quarries in the upper reaches of Red Hill Brook dewater to lower the groundwater, and this groundwater goes into the streams and actually can improve the quality of the water, if you see what I mean. So it's interesting how, you know, some industries clearly cause problems, but in other ways, human industrial activity can sometimes improve water quality. We've had lots of discussions with farmers. Several have been helpful. Practices have improved, of course, but legacy phosphorus released from the soil remains an issue, as does runoff from fertiliser and livestock in our catchment. And I'll talk about Gatwick Airport in a minute after doing sewage overflows. So we know that storm overflows have caught a lot of media attention, and they correlate very strongly with rainfall, but not entirely, because you can see there 2024 had slightly less rain. The blue line shows rainfall, and yet there were still more sewage overflows than in 2023. So they kick off, the spills start at a modest 10 millimeters of rain, and we have a list of big offenders. You can see them on the map there, from a map on 2023 overflows. But it is easy to focus just on storm overflows. But I think what the message we'd like to get across, and again, you'll be across this, is the bigger issue for the Mole is the quality of treated effluent, not only from sewage treatment works, but also private septic tanks. And we're just opening Pandora's box here, because we're starting to find a lot of these private sewage little septic tank issues in the smaller streams, which are, of course, most vulnerable. So, you know, treated wastewater in the summer can make up the vast majority of the river flow. And if it's being leaked into by septic tanks or poor quality sewage outfalls, then it just kills the streams. So the catchment is really complex, and there's no single sector solely responsible for poor quality water, but there's obviously big hitters, and, you know, Thames Water is mostly responsible, it has to be said. So why do flooding and low flows matter so much? Well, the map here shows lag times in hours from the time of peak rainfall to peak discharge. And this is average. So the River Mole is famous for short lag times. So flood peaks arrive just hours after rainfall in and around Crawley. And Gatwick even, in a heavy rainstorm, you know, the lag time there from peak rainfall to the flood peak coming through is literally just hours. This also means that sewage overflows kick off very quickly too. Let me show you one example. It's not even particularly a big flood, but it was just a thunderstorm which happened over Crawley in May 2023. And you can see there the very steep climb in discharge after the most intense rain, a matter of 5 hours at Gatwick Airport. And we're very vulnerable to flooding. Here's a picture of the rear-line section going through Gatwick. That's the outfall from Gatwick Airport at Pond D, by the way. That should be relatively clean water coming out of there, and it generally is. And you can see at the top picture there is just normal flow, about 1 meter cube per second. The bottom picture, I forget the exact date, but I took that when the flow was about 6 cubic meters per second. Now, in 1968, the 1 in 200 year storm had 100 millimeters in a day, and the Mole at Gatwick exceeded, well, it was like 4 times that flow that you can see in the picture. It was like 20 meters cubed per second. That's an estimate. And the flow at Esher was 4 times the average flow in the River Thames going through London. That was over 200 meters cubed per second. Massive discharges in 1968, which if they occurred now, well, goodness knows what they would be like. 2013, 1 in 100 year flood. There was 147 meters cubed per second at Esher. That knocked out power to Gatwick from the Gatwick stream on Christmas Eve, if you remember that. The flood water got through to a sort of generator room and kind of blasted through the wall and cut out the power to the whole terminal. But at the other extreme, the river drops very rapidly in dry weather. So low flows concentrate pollution, as I've said. And we saw fish deaths due to low flow in 2022. That was due to the vanishing of the mole through the mole gap. And the EA rescued fish during that time from the remaining pools that were there. And we also witnessed a fish death event along this rear line section. Nothing to do with pollution. It was just extreme low flows and oxygen collapse. So the flow of the river during dry weather is also important to address. Back to flooding, is it increasing vulnerability? Are we increasing our vulnerability to flooding? I think basically yes. Local data from weather stations shows heavy rainfall events are increasing. That's the chart on the left-hand side. That's a friend of mine who's kept a long-running weather station, and you can do the same with the Charlwood site. It shows days with heavy rain, that's 30 millimeters plus, have been increasing, but so are long dry spells. So we've got this polarizing weather, haven't we? Peak flows at Hawley also seem to be increasing, as you can see there. You can see 1968, so if you look at the scatter charts, that's an anomaly right at the top in terms of flow. And you've got 2014 there, 2013, 14 flows, which are also very high. But the general trend is increasing flows, peak flows. In addition, urbanisation and sedimentation and land use reduce lag times, so we've got less time to prepare for flooding. So future development really needs to consider the chance of extreme flooding events. And we've seen these in Germany and Spain in recent years. And really, we should be on a call to considering the same could happen here or similar. And we've got the airport, of course, which happens to be across the floodplain. So I won't, you guys know all about this. So I'll just quickly go through our perspective on the airport, which might have some not differences, but a slightly different angle. So Gatwick sits across the floodplain of 4 rivers: Crawters Brook, Mans Brook, Upper Mole and Gatwick Stream. It's very vulnerable to flooding. It's in flood zone 2 and 3. Basically, a large amount of it can flood itself. And also it could be a contributor to flooding downstream. And with all of that comes the issue of wastewater, especially including de-icer, which is currently treated at Crawley Sewage Works and Hawley Sewage Works. So that's because it uses such large volumes of fresh water and also has to de-ice the planes. There's something like 1 million litres of de-icer at the end of each winter. So of course, airport expansion would significantly increase passenger numbers, and you're all over this. And this would add further strain to the already struggling sewage treatment works. I mean, it's just jaw-dropping to think that the Hawley Sewage Treatment Works we were visiting just last year, which was flooding everywhere, could take more more wastewater. I mean, there's just no way. It doesn't take a modelling to prove that. But as you know, the DCO requirement says that the Northern Runway cannot enter routine use unless Thames Water provides modelling that shows their system can accommodate the extra flows and completes any upgrades. Well, if they cannot do this, I'm sure you also know Gatwick can build its own wastewater treatment works before the runway can operate. And I think you're looking at a judicial review against the government's decision to approve the Northern Runway. And you're focusing, as Sally was saying, on the issue of climate change, the impacts. I think the climate change allowances were low on the whole, not to the EA guidance of 20 or 40%. So that seems bizarre. I don't really understand why that is the case, to be honest. The noise you're looking at, and also wastewater and environmental assessments. And we certainly recognise all those questions are crucial. It should be said, though, that from a river point of view, some of the expansion proposals could improve what's there at the moment in the mole. So if we just take a look at the river, there are some elements like the floodplain compensation at Museum Field. They're rewiggling certain sections of the river, daylighting some culverts. But of course, that's only good if it's done to a high standard. And that's something we'll be looking at. And it's also important for me to be transparent. We do receive support from Gatwick Airport. We take a polluter pays approach, really. And if an organisation contributes to environmental pressures, we feel, oh, that's fine if they can contribute to some improvement as well. And actually, working with them gives us direct access to water engineers and their teams, which means we can scrutinize their plans and raise concerns quickly, which we've actually done in the past. So, and literally, they're on the end of the phone kind of thing. So if things happen, there was a power cut last year, which I noticed simply from the discharge levels on some of the gauges. They went up with no rainfall. And Gatwick came back to us saying, yeah, there was a power cut. It meant the Archimedes screws couldn't work, and that means Pond D was filling up. So when it eventually came back on, they had to go hell for leather to basically stop Pond D overflowing. So there are things like that which I think are beneficial to have some kind of dialogue between us. So in recent years, the airport has contributed to some flood risk schemes, going back to the flooding thing. For example, they were big contributors to the Upper Mole Flood Alleviation Scheme. And they also, you might know, built the Gatwick Flood Alleviation Scheme. It was really to do with their own terminal being at risk from flooding. The culvert built under South Terminal was too small in the 50s when it was built. So the flood alleviation upstream of that has a big detention pond, a big detention basin, I should say, which allows the flood peak to be stored so that basically the terminal doesn't flood. That had an initial 1 in 100-year protection, but it's probably going down, to be honest, because of development upstream, which increases runoff and reduces hard river defences. So where are we? The decade of change also you would have heard of, and I'm not selling this stuff, but they are aiming to halve water use per passenger by 2030, which is kind of a good thing, I think, if they manage it. Constructing reed beds to treat glycol more effectively. We're looking at, making sure this happens. And also the biodiversity work in the Northwest Zone at Gatwick Woodlands, which is managed by Gatwick Green Space, has also delivered some really good riparian habitat, some of the best on the River Mole, which is really quite good. So these are examples of what's possible. But of course, our job is to ensure that any future changes meet the standards the river needs. And there are also external risks, which are always there. So the de-icer, the car park runoff is substandard. We know that. There's meant to be self-balancing of the car park runoff, which just isn't up to scratch. Power failures and extreme storms can still cause spills reaching the mole. Right, that's it on Gatwick, but we also have SUDs, and beyond Gatwick we've got examples of sustainable urban drainage schemes and natural flood management schemes, which are kind of allied, increasing across the catchment. And again, this can be a good thing, but it can also be below what we expect in terms of design and installation. So on the left hand side you've got some which were put in West Vale, which we always feel are good SUDs on the whole. At least they were. I think we're seeing some influence from lack of maintenance there already, but essentially West Vale appears to slow the rate and reduce the volume of runoff coming off West Vale, which is what it should do, capturing the rainfall near to where it falls and filtering the pollutants with the vegetation and the retention and promoting at least a little bit of infiltration and evaporation. And they create a little bit of habitat and recreational space for people as well. Whereas poor SUDs also exist in the catchment. On the right-hand side, you've got some of my least favourite SUDs at Pease Pottage. They seem to be thrown together. To me, they look hazardous. The only visible thing around there is a lifeguard ring, because you've got a path going past, so you can't see the gradient, but the gradient is so steep, if you fell off the path, you'd roll into that pond, which is a drowning hazard. There's no vegetation. There's no real integration with the natural runoff flow. It just doesn't look like a good sustainable urban drainage scheme at all. So as development grows, we do need to see SUDS quality improving and going in to reduce the risk of flooding and also improve water quality. What you also need is to maintain them, and little pictures down there show blocked swales, blocked culverts, and that just means they're rendered useless. Also urban creep, the addition of more impermeable paving as people live there. They might add artificial grass and all this sort of stuff. Or indeed, suds never getting in to the final build. So Rusper Road housing had suds on the plans, but they never actually got built. There's just a tank discharging into Ifield Brook, which is of no use for improvements at all. Also, we're looking quite a lot at leaky dams, and the EA have put a kind of experimental, highly monitored leaky dam series down the Pitbrook, which is just a lovely walk if you get the chance to go and see them. It's just very beautiful there. And these can slow the flow across the whole catchment. So reasons to be hopeful. We're working with partners to try and make a difference. And they all start with data, really, and collaboration, and of course, hopefully money. There are encouraging examples. So Red Hill Brook, there's a restoration program just kicking off, which we're involved with, associated with a school and downstream into Red Hill. We've already got Nutfield Marshes there, which are part of the sort of Biffa estate and so on. We're talking to them. Pitbrook and Worth Forest, natural flood management. Gatwick Stream, South East Rivers Trust are working with us to improve that. You can see us working on the river restoration at the bottom right. And so flood control and river restoration really go hand in hand. Where we see slowing the flow and creating space for water, we also can see improved water quality and improved recreation for people as well as animals. Right, what are our priorities? Last two slides, so I'm going on a bit. Our priorities revolve around evidence and to some extent holding polluters to account and partnership and everything like that. We want to carry on monitoring the river catchment. As said, we want to hold polluters to account, continue to do that. Particularly want to push for, lobby the EA really, for action on permits and regulation. We feel there's an awful lot to do there, and we're kind of seeking new ways to do that. We want to improve resilience to flooding and drought. That's with natural flood management and SUDS, and also, working with Flood Mapper. We're trying to carry on, well, we are active members of the Catchment Partnership and various other groups which are forging ahead with improving rivers, and definitely sharing data and research nationally. And a recent thing is some of our trustees are seeking to champion the rights of the river mole, which is a longer term stewardship idea, all aimed at improving the river. Right, I'm nearly there. So we've looked at why the mole matters and what our data shows and where the pressures lie, and hopefully leaving on a slightly more positive note in terms of the opportunities. I hope you've enjoyed my talk. Thank you for listening if you're still there. I don't know if anyone's still there. Probably been talking to myself, and Sally, I think, is still there. Thank you, Sally. So I'm very happy to take questions. I don't know, but I think there might be another River Mole River Watch person who's snuck into the to listen, and they're very welcome to field questions if they want to as well, and they might do a very good job of answering some. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you so much. By the way, there's some, if you do spot pollution, there's some hotlines there, and they do respond. I know the EA and Thames Water both have very poor kind of image out there, but the people, I mean, especially the EA, the people we work with in the EA directly, they're just trying their best. They're very often young people. They've come into it from their degree, and they're trying to forge ahead with trying to improve things. So like everything, that it's not the people, it's the system very often. Thames Water is a bit different. We've met some great people in our meetings there as well. But it's more difficult to make headway there. It just seems a bigger organization and things go more slowly. So anyway, there's some phone numbers. There's also an app to phone through to Thames Water if you see pollution which you think is associated with their sewage works. EA is any pollution at all in any water course. Right, there we are. That's it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, let's just, sorry, I'm just going to, if you stop sharing.
Oh, yeah. Try and click the right button. How do I stop sharing? Oh, yeah. Right, there we are.
Okay, so let me pin you alongside me. Here we go. That's the two of us. That's perfect. Okay, we've got a question already, but that was brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I mean, it's really interesting, and through the new runway planning
Mm.
process, we supported Thames Water in requiring of Gatwick as
Oh,
staged growth, and we actually had Gatwick shareholders agree to invest 40 million in an on-site wastewater treatment plant.
oh, brilliant.
And what's frustrating is that obviously the Secretary of State has now left it open to conversations rather than actually taking that forward.
Mm.
And the problem is that because Thames Water haven't provided the detail, and we all know the state Thames Water's in,
Mm.
it's a very much a big concern that that
Yes.
40 million investment may have disappeared now
Oh, good grief.
that was secured during the planning, which would have aided so much. And it could have been, then progressed through the Environment Agency with the tailpipe going into the River Mole, etc.,
Mm.
to improve the environment for people who live locally.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's exactly right.
Gatwick flooded, and what they did was predominantly invested to stop Gatwick ever flooding again.
Mm.
And that's the problem, is that we always see the investment to make sure the business operates.
Yes,
It's the ramifications surrounding it that I
exactly
think
that.
is where Cagney's concern always sits. And of course, the River Mole's been diverted so many times.
Yes, indeed.
Uh,
Absolutely.
so yeah, I mean, a bit like you were saying with the housing developments, we're concerned the riverbeds and all these new wonderful things
Mm.
are actually maintained. But I'm
Yes.
sure you'll hold their feet to the fire as we do. But
Yes. I mean, that's really our aim with these things. To do just that. Yes, absolutely.
and I think also the threat of so much more housing in this area. And as
Mm.
Thames Water said, it's first come, first served who gets the small amount of capacity that there is in
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
sewage works.
Yes,
But
that's right. I mean, we've talked quite a lot with Save West of Byfield. That they're a great group and they support us, and we support them. I mean, if you can see what I mean, we're not a campaign group for no housing, if you see what I mean. So we've helped them with how it might impact wastewater, and it's a similar story really to Gatwick. I mean, the wastewater treatment works are already over capacity and not coping.
yes,
So it's a very similar story. Same with at Hookwood. There's some 700 houses going in there, similar to Dorking. I mean, they are investing in wastewater treatment works. Particularly Burstow has seen more storm tanks going in, so has Dorking, and Dorking hasn't actually spilt. Uh, uh, I don't think it's spilt at all since the summer. I might be wrong there, but something like that anyway. So I mean, they can build as many storm tanks as they will like, but it won't solve the problem ultimately as development catches up with it. They're just getting to where they should be kind of now.
yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't take into account climate change and growth.
Yeah, and
I
I
think
think
that's
I
important.
think the common ground there between everybody is a balanced approach, and not just let's just push it that way. As it were.
Yeah. Yes. I can see Aidan has asked a question. How concerned are you about the negative impact on the mole of 21,000 new houses? Yeah, I mean that's essentially it. Whilst we are concerned about it because trying to keep up with it. I mean, I know from Hookwood, it's this speculative applications that the developers go into, and the locals can't keep up with it. As soon as one is kind of quashed, another one pops up with more building on what is a very wet spot there. And they just seem to speculatively put in these applications, which people have to respond to. And it's very difficult for small groups like ours to keep ahead of everything. But yes, in principle, the idea is to try and make sure that developers put in the best SUDs possible. And they're not even statutory, are they? Putting in SUDs, it's all recommendations and following the SUDs manual. So there are concerns for sure. People need houses, but they need to be built in such a way that they don't increase wastewater spills going into the river and threaten flooding as well downstream.
And I think it's also holding the housing developers, whatever's put in the planning doesn't necessarily come to fruition when they actually build it. So yes, we'll reuse runoff water, rainwater.
Mm.
Never seem to actually come, a bit like we'll build a new school or build a new doctor.
Oh yes,
They're
yes,
there at the beginning, but they seem to disappear
yes.
through the process.
That's right. I mean, I haven't looked at this specifically, but I'm aware of is it west of Byfield having so much rainwater harvesting? There's some extraordinary figure there with their claim to be able to you know circulate so much rainwater, which I thought would require a change in legislation. So I might be wrong there, but it's certainly something that's cropped up. And of course, that Rusper example had suds all over the plans, but they never got put in. So there's just no suds there at all. So I mean that's a bit of an eye opener.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I mean, on the climate change, and obviously where these talks coincide with COP 30,
Yeah.
you know, what are your feelings about climate change and the increase in rain that we're seeing, but also, you know, the quantity that comes down suddenly, and
Mm.
then we have, you know, days with no rain at all, but then
Mm.
it seems to be more intense, or
Mm.
the weather patterns seem to be more intense.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I think what's surprising is that local weather stations, I run a local weather station. My friend down the road has one that's been in there for, well, you saw the chart. I can't remember when he put it in, but it's been in there for like 15 years or something. And even with that shortish level, you can say it's sort of unscientific, really, because it is only a short
Yeah.
sample of time. But the Met Office have also produced similar charts, which I can show you, and which I'm sure you've seen, where the intensity of rain is going up. So individual rainfall events are getting more intense and heavier. So we might get a similar sort of amount of rainfall during a particular month, but it arrives in much bigger quantities in shorter periods of time. And I think we can all, although human memory is terribly fickle and difficult, but rain seems to be and is measurably coming in heavier, shorter, more intense bursts. And this is influencing how the river, which is the point I was trying to make, aligning it with, I mean, those horrendous floods in Germany, I think they were 2021, and was it last year in Valencia? I mean, these are really massive quantities of flood water coming down these catchments, but the catchments are kind of similar in size, some of them, to, they're not the big catchments, they're small catchments. And all you need for the River Mole is a very, very heavy downpour which stays put. Which is basically what happened in 1968, to be honest. It just stays put over the upper mole, and that is where the water collection happens. And that then has to channel all the way through the river. And in less than 20 hours, it's down towards Dorking and further downstream. So yeah, I think we just need to be prepared. And I've been talking to Surrey County Council about this. But of course, that's all up in the air with the change in authority. So
Yes, yes.
yeah, we're going to pursue that, but it's all about resilience. And these developments, going back to your question, need to show that beefed up resilience. It can't just be an afterthought, these SUDs. And which is why it's disappointing to see the climate change allowance at Gatwick is lower than it should be. And I've talked to Jonathan Essex about this at some length. And it just, I don't really understand, to be honest, why it was pitched at that level, but perhaps it's just trying to get away with it and build to a less robust standard.
Yeah, I mean, they only have to comply to what is required, and that was very clear throughout the hearings, is that they only did what they had to do, and they didn't want to go any further than that because they weren't
Right.
required to. And I think, to a certain degree, the housing industry is probably very similar to that.
Yeah.
Aidan's asking another question about the neutrality requirement for housing developments. It's being removed, so it means that they can actually sort of ignore it almost now. I mean, they don't need that extra document that says that how they're going to deal with it.
Yeah, in freshwater use and drinking water supply is a whole different topic, of course. It's a whole nother layer of concern. And passenger numbers going up at Gatwick, and more housing going in. Where is this water going to come from? and how is that going to impact our environment? These are all very important questions. From my understanding, I've spoken to Jenny Frost quite a lot from Save West of Ifield. She doesn't think the removal of water neutrality will make much difference to the West of Ifield development. I think, but it is one of those things where there were all sorts of weird plans, like taking water from the Arun catchment and pumping it back from Crawley so it went back into the Arun. It's all very, very weird juggling of water, it seemed to me, to meet that water neutrality.
Also, the construction of a new runway, the construction of houses, it requires a lot of water, as well as building new hotels and office buildings and car parks. So, we take it for granted that these things are covered, but in actual fact, it is a precious commodity that we're dealing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we're going to be in water deficits from my last reading of some of the the water forecasts for this area. The southeast will be in water deficit in droughts, certainly before 2030, 2035. So we just won't have enough water in this area because we haven't built the capacity of reservoirs that we need, or indeed the water transfer schemes that are now looking like they're on the cards. All these things are kind of 20 years out of date.
So you touched on the surge of water, but then you touched on sort of the drought syndrome. So what do you think is more worrying, the drought or the intense water? I mean, I suppose less water, more concentration of pollution, more water, it's weakened. The concentration is weakened.
But then you get more storm overflows, of course, in the floods. I think they're two sides of the same coin. Because of the changing nature of the catchment, floods arguably arrive perhaps quicker, and we've got more intense rainfall, shortening those lag times. But also the water disappears more quickly. So maybe we can all concur with the idea that landscapes are drying out to some extent so much quicker. Because of warmer weather, there's more evaporation. So it's just going through these polar extremes. We get these terribly wet periods, but we also get prolonged, very dry periods. So both of those are really two sides of the same coin for me. One is development and how much quicker runoff occurs from impermeable surfaces. So we're all, perhaps many of us are guilty of putting driveways in, or indeed, paving over bits and pieces of our gardens to put a patio in. But every single one of those makes an impact on how water is retained on the landscape or not. So this is why I go back to the idea of it's all our behaviours. I think we can point to we can point to Thames Water and so on, but I think the issue of wet wipes going down the loo, I mean, it's extraordinary. When you actually talk to the chaps who are maintaining the sewers, it is extraordinary how many nappies and wet wipes land up down toilets, and you think, who puts those things down there? Certainly nobody we talk to. But there is that. I've wandered off the point a bit now, but I think it's this polarization, the extremes of weather that we're experiencing. So it's the tails of weather. We're getting those more extreme rainfall events, and we're also getting much more prolonged dry weather events, and the landscape is changing so that it can't retain the base flow needed to keep water flowing. So we're seeing more streams drying up and going into very low flow very quickly. And the irony there is that the only thing keeping them flowing is effluent from sewage works very often. So you can see down at some streams, like almost all of it, like Lye Brook, when we tested it in the summer a couple of summers ago, was just basically there was very little flow upstream of Homewood sewage works, and then there was flow downstream. We saw it coming out of the outfall. It's treated, but it's not treated to a wonderful standard, and our tests were showing very high ammoniacal nitrogen, for example, which is pretty hazardous for aquatic life.
Say the fish, it must be very difficult for them, wasn't it? There's a lovely compliment in the chat and an offer of help, but
Oh, that's kind. Oh, Simon's written something nice.
Yes.
Fantastic job. Thank you, Simon. That's very, very kind.
If
Um,
you want to follow it up
River
afterwards.
Mole Preservation Association. Wow, that's cool. In the 70s, yes. Yes, I agree. Our testing methods are, well, we chose the ones where you can actually get a digital readout rather than the coloured sticks, because you know the ones you hold up against the colour chart and you think, where's that on the colour chart? We thought very early, we thought, no, we don't want that. We want figures so we can pin down some statistics and draw some charts basically. And what have you said here? I'll be happy to talk to you about the condition of the river in the 70s days. Much worse than even today. Yes, that's the point. I've heard many times before, and what we've achieved in terms of forcing upgrades. Yes, that's right. I think that goes back to my point about the different stories you get and the way in which, yes, they're bad now, but they have been worse. But equally, you get people saying, well, there's far less fish, and there's the number of invertebrates we used to count and has gone down, and then of course you have the additional burden of more people and more sewage and so on. So it's that's very interesting. But yes, it'd be very interesting to talk to you, Simon. Thank you for that.
I mean, I've also had friends that used to say that they used to sort of swim and play in the River Mole, and now
Mm,
they wouldn't do it. But who knows?
that's right.
Who knows?
That's right. And also regarding swimming, people used to have boat races up and down the stretch along the Hawley Reach. Some of the anglers there were talking to me about that, and saying yes, we used to have a boat race, and some people even reckoned there were boats coming up quite a long way upstream. It was never canalized, of course, but there are stories of the river being much deeper. Some of the farmers along that stretch have suggested that the levels of river are now much shallower, and that may be sedimentation. So the average levels of the river, if there is such a thing, are now much shallower in certain stretches, which is an interesting observation when you think that the river rises so quickly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Okay, well, thank you ever so. We're 2 minutes over.
yes.
It's been fantastic.
Oh,
Listening.
I'm so pleased you liked it. That's good.
Yeah, really lovely to meet you. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
And thank you for the invite.
Well, what long overdue. But as I say, we do this every year. We've been doing it since 2016. The talks.
It's a brilliant idea, matching COP. It is.
Yeah, just to part of our environmental sort of educational, giving everybody an understanding, which is Cagney's aim really, is breaking
Yeah.
down aviation jargon and breaking down the local environmental impacts, but also the climate change impacts of
Yes.
everything that we do,
Yes.
as well as obviously what flying does as well to the planet. But
Indeed.
that's been well covered this week so far. So it's great to talk about rivers and the other issues that the human race is unfortunately causing
That's right.
on our planet.
Well, thank you, Sally, for the invite. And thank you for everyone who's hung on listening. I'm delighted to have spoken to everybody.
Yeah, no, we've got some great comments, and thank you ever so. So I'm going to sort of wrap up now and just say this is the last of our talks this COP30. Thank you ever so for attending. We really do appreciate you, and we love to have feedback from you to topics that we could cover next year and people we could invite, and just things that work for you and things that didn't work for you. CAGNY is a voluntary organisation. We are the largest umbrella aviation community and environment group for Sussex, Surrey and Kent. And we do aim to represent all communities in a fair, balanced manner and to break down the jargon to enable you to participate in consultations, etc. Time is really ticking throughout COP, although it's not looking to be a wonderful COP this year with real targets and challenges. It is highlighting yet again that we are increasing global warming. And so on that point, we hope we do our bit to help you to understand that we all need to take actions in our everyday life to reduce the emissions we all produce. To that note, Cagney has served a judicial review to question the Secretary of State for Transport's approval of this new runway at Gatwick Airport, which the Cagney team, legal team, had the planning inspector actually propose that it was declined, it was refused. So we will continue with that, but only if you support us, and it's only through your support that we have come this far. So I'm just going to put in the chat how you can donate if you wish to the legal fund, which goes directly to her sisters, Lee Day solicitors, or you can donate via our website if you'd rather. Some people don't like these fundraising forums. Anyway, I'm going to stop recording now. Say thank you ever so to everyone attending. Lots of claps going up here for you, Simon. And it's been great once again. And that's us for this year in Time is Ticking. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Sally.